The day after we buried my son, I found myself sitting in his library trying to understand why the woman he married was already liquidating his life. My name is Riley Marshall. I'm 67 years old, and for the past 15 years, this house on Oakmont Boulevard in Newton, Massachusetts, has been my home. Not because I asked for it, because my son Avery promised me it would always be ours. Now he was gone, and I was about to learn that promises don't always survive death. The leather chair creaked beneath me as I shifted my weight. We'd bought this chair together at an estate sale in Concord. Avery had haggled over $50, insisting on principle. "Never pay asking price for furniture, Mom," he'd said with that serious expression he got when teaching me something important. I ran my hand along the worn armrest and tried not to think about the fact that he'd never sit here again. Outside October, rain drummed against the bay windows. Gray light filtered through, casting everything in shades of pewter and shadow. The bookshelves rose around me like fortress walls, floor-to-ceiling solid oak with brass fittings we'd salvaged from an old library in Lexington. We'd spent 3 weekends building them, just the two of us, measuring, cutting, sanding, staining. My hands had blistered. My back had ached. But Avery had been meticulous, checking every angle with his level, refusing to settle for close enough. "This room is permanent, Mom," he'd said. "It has to be perfect." So we'd made it perfect. The books surrounding me were his treasures. Philosophy texts with margins full of his neat handwriting. First editions we'd hunted down at antiquarian shops throughout New England. Technical manuals on artificial intelligence that I'd never fully understood, but had listened to him explain with endless patience. Each spine was a memory, each volume a frozen conversation. I should have left. Gone upstairs, closed my bedroom door, allowed myself to fall apart in private. But something kept me in that chair, some stubborn refusal to abandon the last place that still felt like my son. That's when I heard her coming. The footsteps were unmistakable, sharp, precise, the staccato rhythm of expensive heels against hardwood. Not the soft steps of someone navigating grief. These were purposeful, the sound of someone who knew exactly where she was going and what she needed to do. Taylor appeared in the doorway. She wore a cream-colored suit. Armani, probably. Perfectly tailored. Not black, not the mourning clothes from yesterday's funeral. This was business attire, the kind you wore to meetings where decisions got made and money changed hands. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail. Her makeup was flawless. No sign of tears, no evidence of sleepless nights. She was 35 and beautiful in that calculated way that requires effort and money. She glanced into the library. Her gaze passed over me like I was furniture. No acknowledgement, no greeting, just a brief assessment to confirm I was there. Then she moved on heels, clicking down the hallway toward Avery's study. The scent of her perfume lingered. Heavy. Expensive. It filled the library, drowning out the familiar smell of old paper and leather. I opened my mouth to say something. "Good morning, maybe." Or "How are you holding up?" the useless phrases people say when they don't know what else to offer. But she was already gone. I sat there listening. Her voice drifted down the hallway. She was on the phone. That crisp, efficient business tone she used when she thought no one was paying attention. "Yes, I need everything liquidated before the end of the quarter." Liquidated. The word hit like a slap. The investment properties in Cambridge list them immediately. Market rate may be slightly below if it expedites the sale. I gripped the armrest tighter. And the company shares talked to Sterling about transferring those. I want a clean portfolio. Nothing complicated. Company shares. Marshall Innovations. The business Avery had built from nothing. From an $83,000 check I'd written 20 years ago, and a dream he'd sketched on coffee-stained napkins. She was already planning to dismantle it. One day after the funeral. "No, I don't care about sentimental value," her voice continued. "I care about liquidity. Everything converts to cash. That's the priority." Her voice moved away toward the back of the house, but I could still hear that tone. Cold, clinical. Someone executing a well-rehearsed plan. I looked around the library. At the books Avery had loved. At the shelves we'd built together. At the chair where he'd sat countless nights reading by lamplight, occasionally looking up to share a passage that had moved him. This wasn't grief I was hearing. This was strategy. I stood slowly. My joints protested 67-year-old knees that had spent too many winters in New England. I moved to the doorway where Taylor had stood moments before. The hallway stretched ahead, empty now. but I could still feel her presence, that cold efficiency that left frost in its wake. In all the years Avery had been married to her 4 years that felt simultaneously like forever, and not long enough I'd tried to see what he saw, tried to understand what had drawn my brilliant son to this woman who seemed made of polished surfaces and calculated smiles. Now I wondered if Avery had seen it too, if he'd known in those final months what she would become the moment he was gone. The rain continued against the windows. The house settled with soft creaks, and I stood in that doorway caught between the sanctuary of Avery's library and the cold reality of what his death had unleashed. A memory surfaced unbidden and sharp. 20 years ago, our modest 2-bedroom house in Watertown. Avery was 18, home from his first semester at MIT. We sat at the kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg I'd never quite fixed, and he'd shown me his sketches. Pages and pages of ideas. Algorithms I couldn't understand. Business plans that seemed impossibly ambitious. "I want to build something, Mom," he'd said. "Something that matters. Something that helps people." He'd been so earnest, so full of hope and vision. "I believe in you," I'd told him, and I'd meant it. 6 months later, he'd dropped out of MIT to pursue his dream. Everyone thought he was crazy. My sister called it throwing away his future. My friends suggested I talk sense into him. But I didn't. I believed in him. When he needed funding to start Marshall Innovations, I didn't hesitate. I sold our house. The house where he'd taken his first steps, where his father and I had raised him before cancer took my husband when Avery was only 12. The house that held every memory of our little family. $83,000. Every penny I'd saved. Every piece of security I had. I'd given it to my son, and I'd moved into a small apartment in Somerville telling myself it was temporary, that Avery would succeed and everything would work out. And he had succeeded, beyond either of our wildest dreams. Marshall Innovations grew from a garage startup to a company worth $73 million. Artificial intelligence applications that actually helped people. Technology that mattered. Everything Avery had envisioned. 5 years ago, he'd bought this house, the crown jewel, a beautiful colonial on Oakmont Boulevard with enough rooms for a family he'd hoped to build. "Our house, Mom," he'd said when he'd given me the key. Like I promised. I'd moved into the guest suite on the 2nd floor, not as a guest, as family, as the mother who'd believed in him when no one else did. Taylor had moved in 6 months later, when she and Avery married. At first things were fine. Taylor was polite, cordial. We didn't exactly bond, but we coexisted peacefully enough. She had her career something in marketing at a tech firm downtown. Avery had his work. I had my books and my garden and my quiet life. But something had shifted over the past year. I'd noticed it but hadn't wanted to acknowledge it. The way Taylor looked at me sometimes. Not with hostility exactly. More like assessment. Like I was a problem she was working to solve. The subtle comments about the house being too big and too expensive to maintain. The way she'd discouraged Avery from spending time in the library with me. "You work too hard," she'd say. "You need to relax, not talk about books with your mother." I'd told myself I was imagining things, that I was being overly sensitive, that Taylor was just stressed or tired or adjusting to married life. But now listening to her on the phone talking about liquidating my son's life before his grave had settled, I understood. She'd been waiting, planning, preparing for this moment. The question was, had Avery known I walked back to the leather chair and sat down, picked up the book I'd been holding when she'd walked by? Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, one of Avery's favorites. His notes filled the margins. "The impediment to action advances action," I read in his handwriting. "What stands in the way becomes the way." I closed the book carefully and set it on the side table. Outside, the rain never stopped. The room grew darker as shadows lengthened and the weak October light began its retreat. I didn't turn on a lamp. I just sat there in the gathering shadows and understood with absolute clarity that the storm wasn't over. It was only just beginning. 3 days passed in a strange fog of grief and routine. I moved through the house like a ghost, made tea I didn't drink, picked up books I couldn't focus on, stood at windows watching October leaves fall without really seeing them. Taylor moved through the house like a machine. She was always busy, always on her phone, Always in meetings, virtual ones conducted in Avery's study with the door closed. I tried to give her space. Grief manifests differently in different people, I told myself. Maybe this was how she coped. By staying busy. By focusing on practical matters. But there were moments when I'd catch her off guard. When she'd emerge from the study exhausted and red-eyed, looking like she'd been crying. And I'd think maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she is grieving. Maybe she just doesn't know how to show it. Then she'd see me watching, and her face would transform, become smooth and cold again, and she'd walk past without a word. On the third night, I couldn't sleep. I came downstairs around midnight for warm milk, an old remedy my mother had sworn by. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove. I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone. That's when I saw it. Taylor's phone sitting on the kitchen counter. She must have left it there when she'd gone upstairs an hour earlier. The screen lit up with a notification. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. It was an invasion of privacy. But the message preview was right there, glowing in the darkness. Can we talk? I know this is hard. D. I stared at that message. Read it 3 times. Tried to find an innocent explanation. D. Someone whose name started with D. Who knew this was hard. Who wanted to talk. It could be anyone. A friend. A family member. Someone offering condolences. But something about the phrasing felt intimate. Personal. Can we talk? Not how are you or thinking of you. Something that implied an existing conversation. An ongoing relationship. The screen went dark. I stood there in the kitchen, milk forgotten, trying to convince myself it meant nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just seen something I wasn't supposed to see. I went back upstairs without the milk. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, telling myself I was paranoid. That grief was making me suspicious of innocent things, but sleep didn't come. The next morning I found Taylor in the dining room surrounded by papers. "Morning," I said quietly. She looked up. For just a second something flickered across her face. Guilt fear, but it was gone so fast I couldn't be sure. "Morning, Riley." Her voice was neutral, polite. I moved to make coffee, tried to act normal, but I couldn't help glancing at the papers spread across the table. Financial documents, estate papers, legal forms with Sterling and Associates letterhead. "The lawyer wants to read Avery's will tomorrow," Taylor said without looking up. 10 o'clock, his office downtown. My hands paused on the coffee pot. "Tomorrow." He said it's standard, needs to be done within the week. She was signing something. Her pen moved with quick, confident strokes. "You should come, though I don't think there will be any surprises." The way she said it, so casual, so certain, like she already knew exactly what the will contained. "Of course I'll come," I said. He was my son. Taylor's pen stopped. For a moment neither of us moved. "I know that, Riley." Her voice was softer now, almost gentle. "I know this is hard for you. It's hard for me, too." She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite read. "Exhaustion, guilt, grief. He loved you very much," she continued. "He talked about you all the time, about how you believed in him, how you sacrificed everything for him." My throat tightened. "He was worth it." "Yes." Taylor looked down at her papers again. "He was." For a moment I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe the text message meant nothing. Maybe Taylor was grieving in her own way and I was being unfair. But then her phone buzzed on the table. She grabbed it quickly. Too quickly. Glanced at the screen. And that smooth, cold expression returned. "I need to take this," she said, already standing. She walked out of the dining room, phone pressed to her ear. I heard her voice drift from the hallway. "Hey! No, I can't talk right now. Later, I promise." The tone was different. Softer, more intimate. I stood in the kitchen coffee pot still in my hand and felt the first real stir of unease. That afternoon I went to the library, my sanctuary, the only room in the house that still felt safe. I was reorganizing books, a pointless task, but it gave my hands something to do when I found it. A small notebook tucked between 2 volumes of philosophy texts. The leather cover was worn familiar. Avery's handwriting on the first page, personal journal, private. I should have closed it, put it back. Respected his privacy even in death. But I opened it. The entries were sporadic. Not daily, Avery had never been that disciplined about journaling. But occasional thoughts, observations, reminders to himself. I flipped through pages, not really reading, just seeing his handwriting, hearing his voice in the words. Then something caught my eye. An entry from 6 months ago, March 15th. Mom looked tired today. I asked if she was okay. She said yes, but I don't believe her. I need to make sure she's taken care of, no matter what happens. She gave me everything. I owe her everything. My eyes filled with tears. I turned the page. Another entry, May 20th. Had the diagnosis confirmed today. Pancreatic cancer. 6 to 9 months, they said. Maybe less. I told Taylor. She cried. But I wonder, was she crying for me or for herself? I've been watching her lately. Really watching. And I'm not sure I know her at all. My breath caught. He'd known he was dying for months. And he'd told Taylor. She'd known too. I kept reading, unable to stop. June 3rd. I'm building something. Not just the foundation for Mom. Something else. A test, maybe. I need to know the truth. About Taylor. About what happens when I'm gone. Richard Sterling understands. He's helping me set it up. Richard Sterling. The lawyer. June 15th. Signed the documents today. Everything is in place. If I'm wrong about Taylor, nothing happens. Life goes on. But if I'm right, Mom will be protected. That's all that matters. She deserves to be protected. Protected from what? From Taylor. The last entry was dated August 1st, 2 weeks before he died. I've been watching for signs, hoping I'm wrong. But the phone calls, the late-night texts, the way she looks at me now like I'm an obstacle instead of a husband. I think she's been waiting for me to die, and that breaks my heart. But it doesn't change what I have to do. Mom always taught me character reveals itself in crisis, in how people act when no one is watching, when they think they've won. That's when you see who they really are. I'm giving Taylor 30 days. 30 days to show me who she is, to prove I'm wrong. I hope she does. But if she doesn't, the system I've built will handle everything. Trust the system, Mom. When the time comes, trust the system. The notebook slipped from my hands. Avery had known. About the cancer. About Taylor. About something being wrong in his marriage. And he'd built, what a system, a test. I picked up the journal again. Flipped through the remaining pages. They were blank. My mind raced. The will reading tomorrow. Sterling's careful words. Taylor's behavior since the funeral. The text message from D. 30 days Avery had written. 30 days to show who she really is. I counted back. The funeral was 3 days ago. That meant 27 days left. 27 days until what I sat in the leather chair holding my son's journal and felt something shift inside me. Not just grief anymore. Something else. Something that felt almost like hope. No, not hope. Not yet. But possibility. The possibility that Avery had seen this coming. That he'd planned for it. That he'd found a way to protect me even from beyond the grave. Trust the system, I whispered to the empty library. Okay, Avery. I'm trying to trust it. Outside, darkness was falling. The October evening brought cold air and the smell of rain. I closed the journal carefully. Put it back where I'd found it hidden between the philosophy books. Tomorrow we'd read the will. Tomorrow I'd see what Avery had planned. And maybe, just maybe, Sterling and Associates occupied the 12th floor of a glass tower in downtown Boston. The kind of building where important things happened, where futures were decided and fortunes changed hands. I stood in the elevator with Taylor watching the numbers climb. Neither of us spoke. She checked her phone twice. I watched the digital display, feeling my stomach drop with each ascending floor. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that screamed wealth and discretion. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, original oil paintings of Boston Harbor from a century ago. A young woman in a crisp suit smiled at us from behind a mahogany desk. "Mrs. Marshall and Mrs. Marshall," she said. Not a question. "Mr. Sterling is expecting you. Conference room 3 down the hall on your right." The hallway was lined with photographs. Partners of the firm. Distinguished men and women in expensive suits, their credentials listed in small brass plates beneath each portrait. Richard Sterling's office was at the end of the hall. His door was open. I could see him inside on the phone, gesturing with one hand as he spoke. He saw us and held up one finger. 1 minute. Taylor walked past his office without stopping, heading for the conference room. Her heels clicked against hardwood. confident, like she'd been here before. Maybe she had. I followed her into conference room 3. It was everything you'd expect. Long mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. The Charles River in the distance, glinting in the morning light. Taylor took a seat on one side of the table, not at the head. That was clearly reserved for Sterling, but close to it. The power position. I sat across from her, 10 feet of polished mahogany between us. It might as well have been the Atlantic Ocean. We waited in silence. I studied Taylor's face, tried to read what she was thinking, but her expression was perfectly composed, polite, patient, the face of a grieving widow attending to necessary business. But I kept thinking about that journal entry. I've been watching for signs, the way she looks at me now like I'm an obstacle instead of a husband. Had Avery been right, Sterling entered precisely at 10 o'clock. He was 70 maybe, distinguished silver hair, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. He carried a leather portfolio and moved with the careful economy of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. "Mrs. Marshall," he said to me, nodding. Then to Taylor, "Mrs. Marshall." He sat at the head of the table, opened his portfolio with deliberate movements. Everything about him was measured, controlled. "Thank you both for coming." His voice had that particular cadence attorneys perfect over years of practice. Calm, authoritative. "I know this is a difficult time. I'll try to make this as straightforward as possible." He pulled out a document. Multiple pages bound together with a blue backing sheet. Official, final, irrevocable. "This is the last will and testament of Avery Harrison Marshall executed on June 15th of this year." June 15th, the same date from the journal entry. "Signed the documents today," Avery had written. Sterling put on his reading glasses and began to read. The language was dense, legal terminology that seemed designed to obscure meaning rather than clarify it. "Party of the first part, and herein referred to as, and pursuant to the provisions of." But the core message came through clearly enough. Avery's controlling shares in Marshall Innovations AI, currently valued at approximately $73 million. His investment portfolio, his collection of vintage automobiles, his stake in 3 real estate properties, the house on Oakmont Boulevard. All of it, every asset, every dollar, every piece of the empire my son had built. It was all being transferred to his beloved wife, Taylor Marshall. Sterling's voice droned on, clinical and precise, listing items like inventory in a warehouse. I found myself staring at Taylor, watching her reaction. She listened intently. As each new item was listed, the company shares the property in Cambridge, the investment accounts, I saw something change in her face. It was subtle, barely perceptible. A softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of the shoulders, the faintest hint of... What satisfaction, relief, she didn't smile. She was too controlled for that. But there was something. Across the table, I felt myself shrinking. Not grief, not the raw wound of loss I'd been living with since the hospital called. This was different. This was the slow, crushing realization of insignificance. My name hadn't been mentioned once. Finally, Sterling turned to a new page. His voice changed slightly, gentled just at the edges. "To my mother, Riley Harrison Marshall." I leaned forward, hardly breathing. "I leave my deepest gratitude for being an extraordinary mother and my first investor, for believing in me when no one else did, for sacrificing everything to give me a chance to build my dreams." I waited for more, for the continuation of the sentence, the clause that would come after the dash, but Sterling was already moving to the next paragraph. My entire inheritance, delivered in 63 words. Gratitude, the deepest kind, certainly the most sincere. But gratitude doesn't pay for rent. It doesn't keep the lights on. It doesn't give you a place to sleep when the house you helped build belongs to someone else. I felt something crack inside me. Not grief, something more like erasure. For 20 years I'd been erased from my own life, bit by bit. First when my husband died, then when I sold the house to fund Avery's dream. Then, when I moved into Oakmont Boulevard, technically my son's home, living there on the grace of family connection rather than ownership. And now this, the final erasure, reduced to a single sentence in a legal document, a grateful footnote in the story of Avery Marshall's success. I looked across the table at Taylor. She was studying her fingernails, looking faintly bored. This part of the will didn't concern her. The old woman's inheritance of nice words and warm feelings had nothing to do with the empire she'd just acquired. Sterling was wrapping up now, his voice returning to its professional cadence as he covered the technical details. Probate timelines, tax filings, the mundane machinery that transforms a dead person's wishes into legal reality. Taylor stood before he'd quite finished, smoothly gathering her bag of Birkin, I noticed. Probably cost more than I'd make in a year. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," she said, extending her hand across the table. "This has been very clear." "Of course, Mrs. Marshall." Sterling shook her hand with professional courtesy. "I'll have my own attorneys review the details," Taylor continued. "Just a formality." Her own attorneys. She already had them lined up. Sterling's face remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something that looked almost like disapproval. Taylor turned toward the door, then paused, glanced back at me as if just remembering I was there. "I assume you'll need a few days to make arrangements, Riley." Not Mom. She'd never called me Mom. It had always been Riley. Distant. Formal. "Make arrangements," I heard myself ask. "For moving." She said it gently, almost kindly. "The house is quite large for just one person. I'm planning to downsize. Sell it, probably. Move to something more manageable." The room tilted slightly. "Where would I started but couldn't finish the question. "I'm sure you have friends. Family. I can give you 2 weeks. That should be enough time." 2 weeks. To pack up my life. To find somewhere else to go. To disappear from the house my son had promised would always be ours. "Taylor," I began, but she was already walking out, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor, fading down the hallway toward the elevators. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed felt like a verdict. I stood slowly, gathering myself, preparing to walk out of this office and into whatever came next. But as I moved toward the door, Sterling spoke. "Riley," just my name, but the way he said it made me stop and turn. He was standing now, too. Papers still spread across the conference table, reading glasses in one hand. For a moment we just looked at each other. Two people who'd watched Avery grow from a nervous kid with a dream into a man who built something remarkable. Then Sterling did something unexpected. He nodded. It was the smallest gesture, a dip of his chin, barely noticeable. The kind of movement that could be dismissed as a twitch or a stretch of the neck. But his eyes held mine as he did it, and there was something in that gaze, something deliberate. A promise. A warning I couldn't tell. "Thank you for coming in," he said, his voice formal again, professional. "I'll be in touch regarding the probate timeline." But that nod, that look. As I walked out of Sterling and Associates, rode the elevator down to the parking garage, drove back through the morning traffic toward Newton, that tiny gesture looped through my mind. Sterling knew something he couldn't say in front of Taylor, something that would come later. And for the first time since Avery died, I felt something other than grief and loss. I felt the faintest spark of something that might have been hope. 5 days had passed since the will reading. 5 days of living in limbo, watching Taylor move through the house like she was mentally measuring it for demolition. She'd brought people through, appraisers, she'd said, to determine the value before listing it. They'd walked through every room, taking photos, making notes, treating the space like a commodity instead of a home. I'd retreated to the library, my fortress, the only room she hadn't touched yet, until today. I was sitting in the leather chair reading or pretending to read when I heard voices in the hallway. Multiple footsteps, Taylor's heels and something heavier, men's shoes. The library door swung open without warning. Taylor stood there with 2 men in their late 20s. Both wore casual clothes, jeans work boots. One carried a tablet. The other had a measuring tape clipped to his belt. "This is the space," Taylor said to them. Her voice was crisp, businesslike. She stepped into the library without asking permission, without acknowledging me at all. Her eyes swept the room with cold assessment. "All this dark wood, these old books, it's so oppressive, dated." One of the men nodded, started taking notes on his tablet. "Square footage?" he asked. 12 by 14, Taylor said without hesitation. She'd already measured, already planned this. I stood up slowly from the chair. "Taylor, what's going on?" She glanced at me, as if surprised to find I was still capable of speech. "I'm having the house evaluated, Riley, for renovation." "Renovation, yes." She turned back to the men. "I want all of this cleared out. The shelves, the books, everything. This would make an excellent home gym. Treadmill along that wall. Free weights over there. Maybe a Peloton by the window for the natural light." The words hit me like physical blows. Gym. She wanted to turn Avery's sanctuary into a gym. "Taylor," I said. My voice sounded thin, distant. "This was Avery's library. He and I built these shelves, with our own hands." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and her expression was utterly blank. "Avery's gone, Riley. I know that, but this is my house now, mine, and I'll do with it whatever I choose." The two men had gone very still. One stared at his tablet. The other found something fascinating to examine on the ceiling. Neither wanted to be part of what was happening. I forced myself to speak calmly, to find the words that might reach her. "I understand that legally, yes, this is your house. But Taylor, please, this room meant something to him. To us. You can change anything else. Any other room. I won't object. But not this one." For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered across her face. I thought maybe I'd reached her. Maybe somewhere beneath the cold efficiency there was still a person who remembered that she'd loved my son. But then her eyes hardened. "Memories don't pay bills, Riley. They don't have market value." She took a step closer. "This house costs $12,000 a month to maintain. Property taxes, insurance, utilities. I need to make it work for me, not for ghosts." "I'm not a ghost," I said quietly. "I'm your husband's mother." "My late husband," she corrected, "and I've been more than patient with you. But I need to move forward. I need space to breathe. And I can't do that with you here touching everything, rearranging things, sitting in rooms that don't belong to you anymore." The words were like ice water. "I see." I straightened my shoulders, found whatever dignity I had left. "Then I'll pack my things. Give you that space." "Good." Taylor nodded, as if we'd just agreed on something reasonable. 1 week? Can you do that? 1 week, 7 days to dismantle 20 years of life. "I'll manage," I said. She turned back to the contractors, started pointing at the shelves, discussing demolition timelines and disposal costs. I walked past them, out of the library, up the stairs to my room. My hands were shaking. My breath came in short gasps. But I didn't let myself cry. Not yet. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around. This room had been mine for 15 years. The view of the garden, the morning light through the east windows, the sound of rain on the roof at night. All of it would belong to someone else soon. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts. But who could I call? My sister lived in Florida. My few friends were elderly themselves, living in assisted care or with their own children. I had no one. That's when I heard it. Taylor's voice drifting up from downstairs. She was on the phone again. That same soft, intimate tone I'd heard before. I moved to the top of the stairs. Not to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help hearing. "No, I can't talk right now. I'm dealing with the situation. Yes, she's finally leaving. I know it's been difficult, but we have to be careful. The 30 days, what No Sterling said, there's a waiting period for probate. We have to be smart about this." 30 days, the same phrase from Avery's journal. "I promise, just a little longer, then everything will be ours." Ours. Not mine. Ours. Someone was waiting with her, planning with her. I backed away from the stairs, went into my room, closed the door quietly, sat on the bed and tried to process what I'd just heard. Taylor wasn't alone in this. She had someone. Someone she was making promises to. Someone who was waiting for the 30 days to pass. And suddenly Avery's words made terrible sense. 30 days to show me who she is. Character reveals itself in crisis, in how people act when no one is watching. He'd known, he'd seen this coming, and he'd built something, the system, to handle it. But what system? What was supposed to happen at the end of 30 days? I pulled out my phone again. This time I knew who to call. Richard Sterling answered on the second ring. "Riley?" he said. No surprise in his voice, like he'd been expecting this call. "I need to talk to you," I said. "I know." His voice was calm, measured. Can you come to my office tomorrow alone? Don't tell Taylor. Why the secrecy? Because Avery left very specific instructions, and we're about to find out what they mean. My heart hammered against my ribs. What kind of instructions? The kind that activate when certain conditions are met. Come tomorrow, 10 o'clock. And Riley, yes, bring an overnight bag. You might not want to go back to that house afterward. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in my hand, and felt that spark of hope grow a little brighter. Avery had planned for this, built protection into his will, left instructions. Trust the system, I whispered. Okay, son, I'm trusting it. I left Oakmont Boulevard at dawn before Taylor woke up. 1 suitcase, that's all I took. Clothes, a few photos, Avery's journal hidden in my coat pocket. I didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. Just locked the door behind me and drove away from the house my son had promised would always be ours. The Colonial Motor Lodge on Route 9 wasn't much to look at. Faded sign, peeling paint. The kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions, but it was cheap. And right now, that's all that mattered. Room 14 smelled like industrial cleaner and old cigarettes. Brown bedspread. Lumpy mattress. A bathroom with rust stains in the sink. The television was bolted to the dresser, a detail that spoke volumes about the clientele. I set my suitcase on the rickety luggage rack and sat on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked in protest. This was the distance between Avery's promise and Taylor's reality, measured not just in miles, but in the gulf between what I'd had and what I'd become. I should have felt defeated, broken, like the old woman Taylor clearly thought I was. But I didn't. I felt something else. Something that had been building since I'd found Avery's journal, since Sterling's subtle nod in his office, since Taylor's phone conversation about 30 days. Clarity. My son had been meticulous. He'd built a $73 million company by seeing patterns others missed, by planning 3 steps ahead, by understanding systems so complex that most people couldn't even grasp the questions, let alone the answers. That careful, brilliant, strategic man couldn't have written a will that left his own mother completely unprotected. It didn't make sense. The numbers didn't add up. I pulled out Avery's journal, reread the last entry. Trust the system, Mom. When the time comes, trust the system. A knock at the door made me jump. I checked my watch. 9:30. Too early for Sterling's office appointment. I opened the door cautiously. Richard Sterling stood there in the parking lot of the Colonial Motor Lodge, briefcase in hand, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He entered, surveyed the room with one sweeping glance, and set his briefcase on the small table. "I know this isn't ideal," he said quietly, "but it's temporary." "Mr. Sterling, what's going on?" He opened his briefcase, pulled out a cream-colored envelope. The paper was expensive, heavy, and it bore a wax seal, Avery's personal signet. My breath caught. "The will we read last week was real," Sterling said. "Legally valid, but it wasn't complete." He set the envelope on the table between us. Avery wrote 2 documents, the primary will that gave everything to Taylor, and this. He tapped the envelope. A codicil, a legal addendum that changes everything, but it could only be opened under very specific circumstances. What circumstances? Sterling's expression was grave. When Taylor violated the fiduciary duty clause buried in the primary will, the clause I read quickly, the one about protecting immediate family for 30 days. My heart started hammering. "I'm immediate family." "Yes, you are. And when Taylor threw you out, when she forced you to leave the house, when she made it clear you were no longer welcome in your own home, she violated that duty." He picked up the envelope. "This codicil activates upon documented breach. And Riley, what I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything." He started to break the seal, then paused. "Before I open this, I need you to understand something. Avery knew Taylor for 4 years, married to her for 4, and in those years he saw things, patterns, warning signs. He hoped he was wrong. He hoped she would prove him wrong. But he planned for the possibility that he wasn't," I finished. "Exactly." Sterling broke the seal, pulled out the document inside. "He loved her, Riley. I want you to know that. But he loved you more, and he wasn't going to leave you unprotected." He unfolded the pages, started to read, and with each word I felt the world I thought I knew begin to shift. This wasn't just a will. This was a trap, a test, a carefully constructed system designed to reveal the truth, and Taylor had walked right into it. Sterling finished reading, looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now." He smiled slightly. "Now we wait. We watch. We let Taylor make her next moves, because Avery didn't just protect you, Riley. He documented everything, and the next 30 days are going to be very interesting." He stood, gathered his papers. "Stay here. Don't contact Taylor. Don't go back to that house. Let her think she won. Let her feel safe. And then, Sterling said, the system does what it was built to do." After he left, I sat in that cheap motel room and finally let myself cry. Not from grief, not from loss, from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming love I felt for a son who'd spent his last months not in bitterness, but in preparation, building something that would outlast him, protecting the person he loved most. Outside traffic rushed past on Route 9. The motel sign flickered. The bathroom faucet dripped. But inside that small, shabby room, everything had changed. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time I had Avery's system on my side. "I trust it, son," I whispered to the empty room. "I trust what you built." The storm was coming, but I was ready for it. The document Sterling laid before me looked deceptively simple. 3 pages, cream-colored paper, Avery's signature at the bottom witnessed and notarized. But the words on those pages were anything but simple. "Codicil B to the last will and testament of Avery Harrison Marshall," Sterling read aloud. His voice had that careful, measured tone lawyers use when every word matters. "To be enacted upon documented breach of fiduciary duty as determined by the executor." I leaned forward in the worn motel chair. My hands gripped the edge of the table. "Article 1, Sterling continued. "Upon breach of the fiduciary duty clause as outlined in the primary, will all assets, properties, and holdings previously designated to Taylor Marshall shall be immediately transferred into an irrevocable trust to be known as the Marshall Legacy Trust." The words hung in the air. I had to ask him to repeat them. "All assets," I said. "The entire $73 million, every penny," Sterling confirmed. "The house, the company shares, the investment properties, all of it goes into a trust. And Taylor gets..." Sterling flipped to the second page. "Article 4 addresses that specifically. Let me read it to you." His voice took on a different quality, harder somehow. "To my wife, Taylor Marshall, I leave the following provisions. A monthly stipend of $1,800 to be distributed on the first of each month contingent upon the following conditions. $1,800. From $73 million to $1,800 a month. Condition 1, Sterling read. Mrs. Marshall must maintain verifiable full-time employment. Condition 2, Mrs. Marshall may reside rent-free in the guest cottage at 156 Oakmont Boulevard, provided she maintains the property and abides by house rules established by the trustee." "Who's the trustee?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Sterling looked up at me. "You are Riley. You have full discretionary power over all trust assets and distributions." The room tilted slightly. "Me? Article 2 is very clear. The sole trustee of the Marshall Legacy Trust shall be Riley Harrison Marshall, with full authority over all decisions regarding trust assets, including but not limited to sale of properties, management of Marshall Innovations shares, and distribution of funds." I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot of the Colonial Motor Lodge, at the cars passing on Route 9, at the ordinary world that suddenly felt extraordinary. "He gave me everything," I whispered. "Not to possess," Sterling said quietly. "To protect." Article 3 outlines the Trust's primary mission, funding the Matthew Marshall Tech Scholars Foundation. Full scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing careers in technology and engineering. I turned back to face him. "When did he write this?" "Same day as the primary will, June 15th. He executed both documents simultaneously." Sterling pulled out another paper from his briefcase. "But he also left this." It was a letter, handwritten, Avery's neat script filling a single page. "He asked me to give this to you after the codicil was opened," Sterling said. "I haven't read it. It's private." I took the letter with shaking hands, sat back down. Sterling stood. "I'll give you a moment," he said. "I'll be right outside." The door closed softly behind him. I unfolded the letter. Avery's handwriting blurred as tears filled my eyes. I blinked them away, started to read. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, then I was right. About Taylor. About what would happen after I died. I hoped I was wrong. God, I hoped so hard that I was wrong. But you taught me something when I was young building those bookshelves in our old house in Watertown. You said measure twice, cut once. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. So I planned. The fiduciary duty clause was simple. 30 days. All Taylor had to do was treat you with basic human kindness. Let you stay in the house. Make you feel welcome. Show that she understood your family. If she'd done that, if she'd passed that test, none of this would have activated. The money would have been hers. The house would have been hers. You would have been provided for, but she would have controlled the estate. But if she failed, if she showed her true character when she thought no one was watching, then this. Mom, I need you to understand something. I didn't do this out of cruelty. I did it out of love. For you. You gave me everything. Your house, your savings, your security. You believed in me when no one else did. I couldn't leave you unprotected. Not after all you'd sacrificed. By the time you read this, Taylor will have shown you who she really is. And I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm sorry I married someone who could hurt you. But now you have the power to decide what happens next. You're the trustee. You control everything. Use it wisely, Mom. Build something good from this. Help kids who need chances the way I needed a chance. And maybe forgive me for not seeing the truth sooner. I love you. Always have. Always will. Avery. I read it 3 times. Each word was a piece of my son's voice. Each sentence a reminder of how much he'd loved me. When Sterling came back in, I was crying. But they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of gratitude. He protected me, I said. Even while he was dying, he was planning how to protect me. Sterling sat down across from me. He was very specific about the timing. The 30-day clause gave Taylor a chance, a real chance, but it also gave us time to document her actions. Document how Avery hired an investigator in February, right after his diagnosis. The investigator has been monitoring Taylor's activities, phone records, financial transactions, meetings. All legal, all obtained with proper court orders for estate purposes. He pulled out a folder, much thicker than the first documents. Taylor hasn't been alone in this, Riley. She's been planning too. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs, printed phone records, bank statements. And suddenly I understood why Avery had needed to know the truth. The first photograph showed Taylor at a coffee shop, sitting across from a man I'd never seen before. He was younger than her, maybe 32, 33, handsome in a casual way, dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a sweater and jeans, the uniform of Boston's academic class. "His name is Daniel Wright," Sterling said. "Licensed therapist specializing in grief counseling and family systems. A therapist, not a boyfriend, not an affair." Relief washed through me, followed immediately by confusion. "When did they start meeting?" I asked. Sterling checked his notes. First documented meeting was March 8th, at his office in Cambridge, professional setting. He showed me another photo. Same man, same woman, different location. A cafe this time. March 15th, coffee meeting. Another photo. March 22nd, lunch at a restaurant in Back Bay. The dates marched forward, weekly at first, then twice a week. By July, they were meeting almost daily. These early meetings, Sterling explained, were consistent with therapy sessions. Professional, scheduled, office locations, or public places. He pulled out another set of photos. These were different, more recent. But then something changed. The photos from July and August showed Taylor and Daniel in different contexts, walking together in the public garden, having dinner at an intimate restaurant, standing close on a street corner, his hand on her arm. The relationship shifted, Sterling said carefully. The investigator noted increased frequency, longer duration, more intimate settings. I looked at the phone records, pages and pages of call logs. March through June, once or twice a week. Professional duration, 45 minutes, hour-long sessions. July through September, daily calls. Text messages at all hours, some lasting just minutes. others going on for hours. "What happened in July?" I asked. Sterling was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out another document. Avery's medical records. On July 1st, his oncologist told him the cancer had spread faster than expected. He had weeks, maybe a month, not the months they'd originally projected. My chest tightened. Taylor was with him at that appointment, Sterling continued. According to the investigator's notes, she left the hospital and went directly to Daniel's office. Stayed there for 3 hours. I thought about that. What it must have been like for Taylor, hearing that death sentence, knowing her husband was dying faster than anyone expected. "The night Avery died," Sterling said quietly, "Daniel was at the house. He arrived around midnight, left at 3 in the morning. "You think they were having an affair," I said. "That's what it looked like initially, yes, but—" He paused, pulled out another set of documents. "Daniel Wright's professional records show something different." He handed me a printed form. "This is a client termination notice, filed by Daniel Wright with the Massachusetts Board of Allied Health Professionals, dated September 1st. I read the form. Legal language about ending a therapeutic relationship, about maintaining appropriate boundaries. "He terminated Taylor as a patient," I said. "Yes, 3 weeks before Avery died. The paperwork cites development of feelings that compromise therapeutic objectivity." Sterling pulled out one more document. "And this is Daniel's statement to our investigator when we contacted him last week." I read it slowly. "I met Taylor Marshall in March when she sought counseling about her marriage. She was struggling with her husband's terminal diagnosis. Over the course of our sessions, it became clear that the marriage had significant issues beyond the illness. Taylor described patterns of controlling behavior, financial isolation, and emotional manipulation. In July, when Avery's prognosis worsened, Taylor experienced a crisis. She felt guilty for feeling relief that the marriage would end. She felt trapped between her duty as a wife and her need for freedom. I developed feelings for Taylor that compromised my professional judgment. I terminated our therapeutic relationship in September and referred her to another counselor. We have not had any romantic involvement, though I won't deny that I care about her. If you're investigating whether Taylor had an affair during her marriage, the answer is no. She was seeking help. She was trying to cope with an impossible situation. And I failed her by not maintaining appropriate boundaries." I set down the statement, looked at Sterling. "She wasn't having an affair," I said. "No, she was in therapy, trying to deal with a dying husband and a marriage that was—" Sterling chose his words carefully. "Complicated." "What do you mean, complicated?" Sterling closed the folder, leaned back in his chair. "Riley, I need to tell you some things about Avery. Things I observed over the years. Things that might be difficult to hear." My stomach dropped. "Tell me." "I loved your son like a nephew," Sterling began. "He was brilliant, visionary, but he was also, and I say this with great respect, extremely controlling. The word hung between us." "In what way?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "The way he ran his company, the way he managed every detail of his life, and the way he treated Taylor." Sterling pulled out another file. "These are employment records from Marshall Innovations. Taylor worked there for the first 8 months of their marriage. She was in marketing, good at her job according to performance reviews." He showed me the documents. Excellent ratings, positive feedback from colleagues. Then in month 9, she resigned. Sudden, no warning. Why? According to Sarah Kim, the VP who hired Taylor Avery insisted she quit. Said she didn't need to work. That it took time away from their marriage. That he provided enough income for both of them. I thought about that. About how Taylor had no income of her own. No financial independence. After she quit, Sterling continued, things changed. Sarah stayed in touch with Taylor for a while. She said Taylor became isolated. Avery discouraged her friendships, monitored her spending, made decisions about what she wore, what she did, who she saw. "That doesn't sound like Avery," I said. But even as I said it, I remembered things. The way Avery had been particular about everything, precise, demanding perfection. The way he'd talked about Taylor sometimes. She's learning. She's adjusting, like she was a project to be managed. "I don't have proof of abuse," Sterling said carefully. "I have observations, patterns, Concerns I had but didn't know how to address while Avery was alive. He pulled out one more document. This is from Taylor's therapist, a letter Daniel wrote to our investigator after we contacted him. He had Taylor's permission to share it. I took the letter, read it slowly. Taylor Marshall came to me in March suffering from complicated grief. She was married to a dying man, but she was also trapped in a relationship that had become increasingly controlling. Avery Marshall controlled their finances. Taylor had no bank account of her own, no credit cards. He didn't monitor no access to money without his approval. He dictated her schedule, her friendships, her activities. When Taylor expressed interest in going back to work, Avery forbade it. When she wanted to visit friends, he found reasons why she shouldn't. When she questioned his decisions, he reminded her that he was the one who provided for her, who had given her the life she had. This is classic financial and emotional abuse, even if Avery didn't recognize it as such. Even if he believed he was acting out of love or protection. Taylor felt guilty for wanting the marriage to end. She felt like a monster for feeling relieved that her husband's death would free her. She was trapped between duty and survival. That's why she came to me, not to plan an affair, not to plot against Avery, but to understand her own feelings and to figure out how to survive. I set down the letter. My hands were shaking. My son, I said slowly, was abusive. I don't know if Avery would have used that word, Sterling said gently. I think he loved Taylor. I think he wanted to take care of her. But somewhere along the way, taking care of her became controlling her. I thought about the journal entries, about Avery watching Taylor, documenting her behavior, building a test. Even in death, he was trying to control what happened. The codicil, I said. The test he built. That was another way of controlling her, wasn't it? Sterling was quiet for a moment. Yes and no. Avery had legitimate concerns about protecting you, about making sure Taylor didn't squander the estate. But you're right, there was an element of control in it. One last way to dictate terms even after he was gone. I stood up, walked to the window again, tried to process everything I'd just learned. My son, my brilliant, loving son, had been hurting his wife, and I hadn't seen it. I couldn't sleep that night. Kept seeing Taylor's face, hearing Sterling's words, reading Daniel's letter. The next morning I did something I should have done weeks ago. I went to see people who knew Avery, really knew him, not as a son, but as a boss, a colleague, a husband. Sarah Kim agreed to meet me at a cafe in Cambridge. She was 45, stylish, with the efficient air of someone who'd spent decades in corporate America. Mrs. Marshall, she said as she sat down, I was so sorry to hear about Avery. Thank you. I ordered coffee I wouldn't drink. Sarah, I need to ask you some questions about Avery and Taylor, about their marriage. Sarah's expression shifted, became guarded. What kind of questions? The truth, I said simply. I need to know the truth about my son. She was quiet for a long moment, then she nodded. Avery was brilliant, she began. One of the smartest people I've ever worked with. He built Marshall Innovations from nothing. He saw the future of AI before most people understood what AI was. But, I prompted. But he expected perfection from everyone around him, including himself, especially himself. She stirred her coffee. When Taylor started working with us, I thought she was great. Creative, smart, good with clients. But Avery, he couldn't separate being her boss from being her boyfriend. What do you mean? He'd critique her work in front of other people, correct her presentations, rewrite her proposals. He said he was helping her improve, but it felt more like he was molding her, shaping her into his vision of what she should be. Sarah looked up at me. After they got engaged, he told her she should quit, that it was inappropriate for her to work at his company, that people would think she only got the job because of their relationship. But she'd been hired before they started dating, I said. Exactly. She'd earned her position, but Avery convinced her to leave. And after that? Sarah trailed off. After that, what? After that, I'd see Taylor at company events, and she was different, quieter, more polished, but less herself. She always looked perfect, dressed perfectly, said the right things, but it was like she'd been trained. I thought about the Taylor I'd known, always impeccable, always controlled, never spontaneous. Did Avery talk about their marriage? I asked. Sometimes. He'd complain that Taylor didn't understand the pressure he was under, that she wanted too much of his time, that she didn't appreciate everything he provided for her. Sarah paused. But Mrs. Marshall, the thing is, I saw how hard Taylor tried. She'd plan surprises for him and he'd criticize the details. She'd suggest activities and he'd explain why his schedule was too important. She couldn't win. After Sarah, I met with Tom Bradley, Avery's friend from college. They'd kept in touch over the years. Tom was more direct. I loved Avery like a brother, he said, but his marriage worried me. Why? Because he micromanaged everything, what Taylor wore to events, what she ate, how she spent her time. He tracked her phone, monitored her credit card. He said it was because he wanted to keep her safe, because he wanted to make sure she had everything she needed. But it was control, I said. Yeah, it was control. Tom looked uncomfortable. I tried to talk to him about it once, about maybe giving Taylor more independence. He got angry, said I didn't understand, that marriage was about partnership, and partnership meant making decisions together. But they weren't making decisions together, I said. No, Avery was making decisions and Taylor was following them. Tom was quiet for a moment. The thing is, I don't think Avery saw it as abuse. I think he genuinely believed he was taking care of her, that he was being a good husband by managing everything, by protecting her from stress and bad decisions. But it hurt her, I said softly. Yeah, Tom nodded. It hurt her. That afternoon I did something that felt like betrayal, but I knew I had to do. I went back to Oakmont Boulevard when I knew Taylor would be at work. Used my key, she hadn't changed the locks yet. The house felt different, emptier. Or maybe I was the one who was different. I went to Avery's study, sat at his desk, and I read more of his journal, the parts I'd skipped before. April 3rd, had argument with Taylor today. She wants to take a ceramics class. I don't understand why. She has everything she needs here. I provide everything. Why does she need hobbies outside our home? April 15th, told Taylor we need to cut back on her spending. Saw she bought coffee at that cafe again. $5.50 for coffee we have at home. It's wasteful. She needs to understand we don't throw money away. May 1st, Sarah asked if Taylor might want to come back to work part-time. I said no. Taylor doesn't need to work. It would just distract from our life together. She seemed upset when I told her. I don't understand why. May 20th, diagnosis confirmed. Cancer. Dying. And all I can think is, what will Taylor do when I'm gone? Will she finally leave like she's always wanted to? I've seen how she looks at me sometimes, like I'm a prison guard instead of a husband. I closed the journal, sat in the silence of Avery's study, and I understood. My son had known. He'd known his marriage was broken, that he was breaking it. But instead of changing, instead of loosening his grip, he'd held on tighter. Even in death with the codicil and the test, he was still trying to control what happened. I thought about the letter he'd left me. If she'd passed the test, the money would have been hers. But could Taylor have passed? Could she have shown kindness to the mother of the man who'd controlled her for 4 years? Could she have pretended to grieve a marriage that had been a prison? I wasn't sure anymore. I went to the library. Our library. The one we'd built together. The shelves were still there. Taylor's contractors hadn't started demolition yet. The books stood in neat rows, Avery's handwriting in the margins. I pulled out the Marcus Aurelius, read the note Avery had written, "The impediment to action advances action." And below it, in different ink, more recent, I found another note in Avery's handwriting. I built impediments. For Taylor. For myself. I see that now. But I don't know how to stop. How to let go. How to love without controlling. My son had known, and he'd tried to change. Or at least he'd known he should change. But he'd run out of time. Sterling's investigator sent me daily reports. I felt like a spy. But I needed to understand what was happening. Week 2 after the will reading, Taylor's credit cards started declining. The investigator captured it on video. Taylor at a grocery store, trying to buy food. Card declined. She tried another card. Declined. Tried a third. Same result. She'd left the store without groceries. Sat in her car in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Just sitting there. Sterling had frozen the estate accounts. Standard procedure during probate, he said. Could take months to release funds. Taylor had approximately $3,000 in the personal account Avery had allowed her to have for small expenses. Everything else went through him, had gone through him. Now it went through probate, through Sterling, through a system that moved at the speed of law, not need. By week 3, the bills were arriving. Property tax on Oakmont Boulevard, $8,000 quarterly payment due. Insurance, $3,500 annually payment due. Utilities for a house that size, $1,200 monthly. Taylor couldn't pay any of it. Her personal account was nearly empty. The investigator's report noted, subject appears increasingly distressed, weight loss visible, dark circles under eyes, observed crying in vehicle after meeting with bank. I sat in my motel room reading these reports and felt complicated. Part of me, the part that had been thrown out that had been called a burden, felt satisfied. Justice, consequences. But part of me, the mother part, the part that understood being trapped, felt something else. Pity, no, not quite. Understanding, maybe, of what it meant to have no control over your own life. Week 4, Taylor got a job, Commonwealth Coffee on Tremont Street, $7.50 an hour plus tips. The investigator captured her first day. She wore jeans and a t-shirt, clothes I'd never seen her in before. Her hair in a simple ponytail. No makeup. She looked younger, more like the person she might have been before Avery. She took orders, made lattes, cleaned tables, and she looked not happy exactly, but real. The investigator noted subject appears to be adjusting to employment. Co-workers describe her as quiet but hard-working. No signs of the previous lifestyle, living simply. That night I saw her leave work, walk to the bus stop, wait for the bus. Taylor Marshall, who'd owned a BMW, was taking public transportation. Who'd worn designer clothes, was in thrift store jeans. Who'd planned to turn my son's library into a gym, was making $7.50 an hour plus tips. And I felt that complication again. That uncomfortable mix of justice and empathy. She was learning what I'd lived with for years, what most people lived with. The reality of working for wages, of counting pennies, of having to choose between wants and needs. But she was also living the consequences of her own cruelty, of throwing out her husband's mother, of liquidating his memory, of failing the one test Avery had given her. That night I called Sterling. "How long are you going to keep the accounts frozen?" I asked. "As long as legally justified," he said. "Probably another few weeks, maybe a month. And then we open the codicil officially. Schedule a formal meeting. Let Taylor understand what she's lost." "Richard," I said slowly, "I've been reading the reports about Taylor, about her marriage to Avery. And I'm not sure anymore who the villain is in this story." Sterling was quiet for a moment. "Read the rest of the codicil, Riley, the part I didn't read to you. There's more. There's always more. Avery was thorough. Read Article 7, then call me back." He hung up. I pulled out the codicil, found Article 7, started reading, and everything changed again. Article 7 was different from the rest of the codicil. The language was less formal, more personal. Regarding Daniel Wright, if investigation reveals that my wife sought comfort with another man during my illness, I acknowledge my own role in creating the circumstances that drove her to seek that comfort. I controlled when I should have loved. I imprisoned when I should have freed. If she found someone who treated her better than I did, I cannot blame her. I read it 3 times, trying to understand. Avery had known about Daniel, had investigated him, and instead of rage or revenge, he'd written, understanding there was more. If Daniel Wright proves to be a good man who genuinely cares for Taylor's well-being, he has my blessing. I would rather see her happy with someone else than trapped in a marriage that became a cage. I called Sterling back. "He knew about Daniel," I said. "Yes, the investigator's reports went to Avery every week. He knew Taylor was seeing a therapist, knew that relationship was becoming complicated. And he forgave her?" "He forgave himself," Sterling said quietly. "Read the final paragraph." I found it. The last words Avery had written in the codicil. "To my mother, if you're reading this, then Taylor failed the test. She hurt you. She threw you out. She showed her worst self. And for that, there must be consequences. But Mom, I need you to understand something. The test wasn't just for Taylor. It was for me, too. To see if I'd built a marriage based on love or control. to see if the woman I married would show kindness when she didn't have to, or cruelty when she thought no one was watching. She failed. But I failed first. I failed her. I failed to be the husband she deserved. I failed to see that love means freedom, not possession. The codicil gives you power. Use it wisely. Use it with compassion. Because Taylor is not a villain. She's a person I hurt who hurt you in return. And that cycle needs to end. There's a provision I haven't told Sterling about yet. A final option. In the envelope marked Trustee Discretion. It's there if you need it. If you decide that justice needs to be tempered with mercy. Trust yourself, Mom. Trust your judgment. Because unlike me, you know how to love without controlling. A. My hands were shaking. I set down the codicil. There's another envelope, I said to Sterling. Yes, in my safe, marked Trustee Discretion. Avery said I should only give it to you after you'd read the full codicil, after you'd had time to investigate, to understand the whole story. What's in it? I don't know. He sealed it himself, said you'd know when to open it, if you needed to open it at all. I thought about Taylor at Commonwealth Coffee, making lattes for $7.50 an hour. I thought about the text message from Daniel. Can we talk? I know this is hard. I thought about Avery's journal entries, about control masquerading as love. I want to meet Daniel, I said suddenly. What Daniel write? I want to meet him, talk to him, understand what happened. Sterling was quiet. Are you sure that's wise? Probably not, but I need to understand. I need to hear it from him. I'll arrange it, Sterling said. But Riley, whatever you learn, it might change how you see everything, including Avery. I know, I said, but I need the truth. All of it. 2 days later, I sat across from Daniel Wright in a quiet cafe near Harvard Square. He was nervous, kept adjusting his glasses, fidgeting with his coffee cup. Mrs. Marshall, he said, I'm not sure what you want me to say. The truth, I said simply. About Taylor, about my son, about what happened. He took a breath, let it out slowly. Taylor came to me in March, he began. She'd found my name through a referral service. She said she needed help coping with her husband's terminal diagnosis. And you helped her. I tried to. But as we worked together, it became clear that the terminal illness wasn't the only problem. The marriage itself was complicated. How complicated? Daniel chose his words carefully. Avery controlled every aspect of Taylor's life. Her money, her schedule, her friendships. It's called coercive control. It's a form of domestic abuse. The words stung, but I needed to hear them. Taylor felt guilty for wanting the marriage to end, Daniel continued. She felt like a monster. She'd be crying about Avery dying and then feeling relieved and then hating herself for feeling relieved. It was a cycle of guilt and grief and anger. When did it change? I asked. When did your relationship become more than professional? He looked down at his coffee. July, when Avery's prognosis changed, when she realized she only had weeks left instead of months. She had a breakdown in my office, and He paused. I held her, just held her while she cried, and I realized I'd crossed a line. You fell in love with her? Yes, which meant I couldn't be her therapist anymore, so I terminated our professional relationship, referred her to a colleague, and I stepped back. But you didn't step away completely. No, he met my eyes. I couldn't, because by then I knew what her life was like. I knew that when Avery died, she'd have no one. No friends, he'd isolated her from everyone. No job, he'd convinced her to quit. No money, it was all in his name. So you stayed, I said. I stayed. Not as her therapist, not as her boyfriend, just as someone who cared. Someone who could make sure she was okay. Are you in love with her now? I asked directly. He didn't hesitate. Yes. And is she in love with you? I don't know, he said honestly. I think she's too exhausted to know what she feels. She's barely surviving right now, working minimum wage, living in that guest cottage, trying to figure out who she is without Avery controlling her. I sat back, processed this. Do you think she's a bad person? I asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I think she's a person who was hurt and who hurt others in return. I think she threw you out because you represented everything she'd endured. You looked at her with Avery's eyes. You reminded her of a marriage that had been a prison. That doesn't make it right, They said. No, it doesn't, but it makes it understandable. Context doesn't erase consequences, but it helps explain them. I thought about the codicil, about Avery's final words, about the envelope marked trustee discretion. If I asked you, I said slowly, to tell me honestly whether Taylor deserves a second chance, what would you say? Daniel met my eyes. I'd say that everyone deserves a second chance, Mrs. Marshall, even people who hurt us, especially people who hurt us, because mercy is what makes us human. I left that cafe with more questions than answers, but I also left with something else, a piece of the puzzle I'd been missing. Taylor wasn't a villain. She was a victim who'd become an aggressor, a person trapped who'd hurt another trapped person trying to break free. And my son, my brilliant, loving son, had been both victim and villain, controlled by his own need to control. The truth was messy, complicated, not the clean narrative I'd wanted, but it was the truth. That night I called Sterling. I want the envelope, I said. The one marked trustee discretion. Are you sure? Yes, because I think I know what Avery wanted me to do, and I think I know how to end this cycle. I'll bring it tomorrow, Sterling said. But Riley, once you open it, there's no going back. Whatever choice you make will be final. I know, I said. That's why I need to make it carefully. I hung up and sat in the darkness of my motel room. Outside traffic rushed past on Route 9. The neon sign flickered. The world moved on indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in cheap rooms and expensive houses. But inside I felt something shift. Not anger anymore. Not even grief. Something else. Something that felt like wisdom earned through pain. Tomorrow I'd open that envelope. Tomorrow I'd see what final gift Avery had left me. Tomorrow I'd decide not just Taylor's fate, but my own. Sterling arrived at my motel room at 9 in the morning. He carried a single envelope, cream-colored, sealed with red wax. Avery's signet pressed into it. This is it, he said, setting it on the table between us. Once you open this, whatever decision you make is final. The trust documents allow for one modification at trustee discretion. Just one. After that, the terms lock in permanently. I stared at the envelope. My son's final message. His last piece of guidance from beyond the grave. Before I open it, I said I need to know something. The 30 days. They're almost up. What happens when this deadline passes? Day 30 is tomorrow, Sterling confirmed. At that point, the codicil becomes fully enforceable. Taylor gets notified of the new terms. The $1,800 stipend begins. She moves to the guest cottage. The main house transfers to the trust. And if I use the trustee discretion clause, then you can modify those terms. Once. Whatever you decide becomes the final arrangement. I picked up the envelope, felt its weight. Avery had thought about this, planned for this moment, left me one last choice. I broke the seal. Inside was a single page, Avery's handwriting, not typed like the legal documents. This was personal. Mom, if you're reading this, you've learned the truth. About Taylor, about our marriage, about me. I hope you've met Daniel. I hope you've heard his side of the story. I hope you understand that the situation was more complicated than it seemed. I built the codicil to protect you, but I also built it to punish Taylor, to control her even after death, because that's what I did. I controlled, even when I shouldn't have. But I've had time to think, time to understand that control isn't love, that punishment doesn't heal, that the cycle of hurt has to end somewhere. So here's your choice, Mom. Option 1. Enforce the codicil as written. Taylor gets $1,800 a month, the guest cottage strict conditions. She learns to live with consequences. You get justice. Option 2. Modify the terms using trustee discretion. Give Taylor something different. Maybe more, maybe less. Use your judgment about what's fair. Option 3. There's a third sealed document in Sterling's safe, marked alternative resolution. I wrote it in my last week, when I finally understood what I'd done, what I'd become. If you choose option 3, you'll see what I wanted to happen if you decided that mercy matters more than justice. If you decided that breaking the cycle matters more than being right. I can't tell you what to choose, Mom, but I can tell you this. Whatever you decide, do it from love, not from hurt, not from anger, not from the need to be right. Do it from the kind of love that heals instead of controls. That's the kind of love you taught me, even if I forgot it for a while. Trust yourself. You've earned that right. I love you. Avery. I read it 3 times, each word settling into my heart like stones in still water. 3 options. 3 different futures. I looked at Sterling. The 3rd document. Can I see it? He reached into his briefcase, pulled out another sealed envelope. This one was marked Alternative Resolution, to be opened only at Riley Marshall's request. I broke the seal, read the document inside, and understood. This was what Avery had wanted. Deep down, when he'd let go of control, when he'd seen clearly, this was the answer. I requested the meeting for day 30, exactly 30 days after the will reading. Full circle. Sterling's conference room. Same long mahogany table. Same floor-to-ceiling windows. But everything else was different. Taylor arrived at 10 o'clock. She wore her Commonwealth coffee uniform jeans, simple t-shirt, hair, and a ponytail. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes. She saw me sitting there and stopped in the doorway. Riley. My name came out uncertain, almost fearful. Please sit down, Taylor. She sat across from me, same seats as the will reading. But the dynamic had shifted. She was no longer the confident widow who'd inherited everything. She was exhausted, scared, barely holding on. Sterling sat at the head of the table, placed documents in front of him. Mrs. Marshall, he said to Taylor, thank you for coming. We're here to discuss the estate settlement. Taylor's hands clenched in her lap. I thought everything was settled. The will was incomplete, Sterling said gently. There was a codicil, conditions that had to be met. I watched Taylor's face go pale. What conditions? Sterling pulled out the codicil. The will included a fiduciary duty clause. You were required to maintain family welfare for 30 days, specifically to treat Avery's immediate family, his mother, with kindness and respect. Taylor's breathing became shallow. You violated that clause, Sterling continued. On day 5, you evicted Mrs. Marshall from her home. You threw her out with 1 week's notice. You made it clear she was no longer welcome in the house her son had promised would always be hers. Taylor looked at me. Her eyes were filling with tears. Riley, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was grieving and angry and... You were hurting, I said quietly, and you hurt me in return. She nodded, started crying. Yes, I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. Sterling opened the codicil. The violation of the fiduciary duty triggers alternative terms. Let me read them to you. I watched Taylor's face as Sterling read, watched her understand what she'd lost. The $73 million, the house, the properties, all of it gone. Transferred to a trust she didn't control. She'd be left with $1,800 a month. The guest cottage. Requirements to work full-time, from everything to almost nothing. When Sterling finished, Taylor was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. She didn't wipe them away, just let them fall. Do you understand these terms? Sterling asked. Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. Do you have any questions? Just one. Taylor looked up at me. Why did Avery do this? And that was my moment, my choice. I could say because you failed his test, because you showed your true character, because you deserve these consequences. All of that would be true, but it wouldn't be the whole truth. Because my son loved me, I said slowly, and he wanted to protect me, but also... I paused, choosing words carefully, because he was testing himself. Testing whether the marriage he'd built was based on love or control. Testing whether you would show kindness when you didn't have to. Taylor stared at me. Testing himself? He knew Taylor, about the therapy, about Daniel, about how trapped you felt. He knew the marriage was broken, and he knew he'd broken it. Her face crumpled. He knew about Daniel. Yes, and he forgave you, because he understood he'd driven you to seek comfort elsewhere. He understood what he'd done to you. Taylor put her head in her hands, sobbed. I didn't cheat. I swear I didn't. Not while he was alive. Daniel and we never... I know, I said gently. I've spoken with Daniel. I understand what happened. She looked up at me, desperate. Then why? If Avery understood, if he knew it was his fault too, why did he build this punishment? Because I said he was dying, and dying doesn't automatically make someone wise. It doesn't erase old patterns. He loved you, but he loved controlling things more. This codicil was his last attempt at control. Sterling shifted in his seat. He didn't know where I was going with this. Neither did Taylor. But Avery did something else, I continued. Something that showed he was trying to change. Trying to understand. I pulled out the alternative resolution document, set it on the table. He left me a choice. Not just to enforce the codicil, but to modify it. To show mercy instead of just justice. Taylor's eyes widened. He left a provision, in case I decided that the codicil was too harsh, that the cycle of hurt needed to end. I opened the document, read aloud. Alternative resolution. If the trustee determines that enforcement of standard terms would perpetuate harm rather than heal it, the trustee may instead enact the following modified arrangement. I looked at Taylor. Do you want to hear what Avery actually wanted? What he hoped I would choose? She nodded, unable to speak. I read the terms Avery had written in his final week. The real terms. The ones that came from understanding rather than control. The estate shall be divided as follows: 50% to the Marshall Legacy Trust for scholarships, 25% to Riley Marshall, 25% to Taylor Marshall. Taylor gasped. What bait? Taylor Marshall shall receive her portion outright with no conditions, no work requirements, no restrictions. This is not charity. This is acknowledgement that she endured a difficult marriage and deserves the means to build a new life. I kept reading. The house at Oakmont Boulevard shall be transferred to the Marshall Legacy Trust, but Taylor shall have the right to remain there for up to 1 year while establishing her new life, after which she may choose to stay as a renter or move elsewhere. Sterling was staring at me. He'd known about this document but hadn't expected me to invoke it. Riley Marshall shall receive the library intact to be relocated to wherever she chooses. This library was built together and should remain together. My voice broke slightly on that line, but I continued. Daniel Wright shall be held harmless. He was a good man trying to help someone in pain. He deserves no blame for the failure of my marriage. I set down the document, looked at Taylor. That's what Avery wanted, in the end, when he let go of control, when he saw clearly. Taylor was crying, not quiet tears now, deep wrenching sobs. I don't understand, she choked out. Why would you? I threw you out. I was cruel. I called his books clutter. I wanted to turn his library into a gym. Why would either of you show me mercy? I stood up, walked around the table, sat down next to her instead of across from her. Because, I said gently, my son hurt you, for years. And when he died, you hurt me. And if I hurt you back, the cycle just continues. Someone has to break it. She looked at me, eyes red, face blotchy, completely undone. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Maybe not, I said honestly. But none of us deserve most of the good things we get. That's what grace means. Getting something good we didn't earn. I took her hand. She didn't pull away. Taylor, I'm not doing this because you deserve it. I'm doing it because Avery asked me to. Because he saw clearly at the end what he'd done wrong. Because he wanted to break the cycle of control and hurt. And because, I added, I think you deserve a chance to figure out who you are without my son controlling you. Without poverty controlling you. Without fear controlling you. She squeezed my hand, held on like it was a lifeline. I'm so sorry, she said, for everything, for how I treated you, for I know, I said. And I forgive you, not because what you did was okay, but because forgiveness is the only way forward. Sterling cleared his throat. So Riley, you're invoking the alternative resolution, modifying the codicil terms. Yes, I said firmly. That's my decision. He made notes, started preparing the documents. Taylor and I sat there, hands clasped. 2 women who'd been hurt by the same man we'd loved. 2 women trying to find a way forward. The Marshall Legacy Foundation occupied the renovated first floor of Oakmont Boulevard. Taylor had kept her promise, lived there for 6 months while getting her life together, then moved to a smaller home in Brookline. She'd donated the use of the house to the foundation, rent-free for 5 years. It was her way of giving back. I stood in what used to be the living room, now converted to a classroom. 20 students ages 14 to 18, all from families who couldn't afford private education, sat at computers learning to code. The library had been preserved, relocated to one end of the building, The oak shelves we'd built, the books we'd collected, the leather chair where Avery had sat countless nights. It was a memorial now, a study space for students, a reminder of where it all began. Taylor walked in carrying coffee. She looked different, healthier. Her hair was longer natural. She wore jeans and a sweater, comfortable clothes, her own choices. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing me a cup. "Thank you." We stood together watching the students work. "Daniel's class is starting in 10 minutes, Taylor Satie said. "He's teaching them about cognitive behavioral therapy, how to manage stress and anxiety while pursuing demanding careers." Daniel had joined the foundation as a volunteer counselor. He and Taylor were together now, officially, taking it slow, building something healthy from the rubble of what had been broken. "How are you two doing?" I asked. Taylor smiled, a real smile. "Good. Different from what I had with Avery. Daniel lets me be myself, makes suggestions but doesn't demand, asks what I want instead of telling me what I should want. That's how it should be," I said. "I'm learning that." She paused. "I'm also learning how to forgive myself, for staying as long as I did, for how I acted after, for hurting you." I touched her arm. "You're doing good work here, with the foundation. That's what matters now." She nodded. "It's the least I can do, after everything." A student called to Taylor with a question. She excused herself, went to help. I watched her interact with the kid. Patient, encouraging. No trace of the cold, controlled woman who'd walked through this house 6 months ago. People could change. Not always. Not easily. But sometimes. Sterling appeared in the doorway. "Riley, there's someone here to see you." A woman in her early 20s stood next to him. She carried a portfolio. "Mrs. Marshall, I'm Sophie Chen. I'm a sophomore at MIT, computer science major." "Hello, Sophie. I wanted to thank you in person. I received one of the Marshall Legacy Scholarships. Her voice caught. "It's changing my life. I'm the first person in my family to go to college." My throat tightened. "I'm so glad we could help. It's not just the money," Sophie continued. "It's knowing someone believes in me. That's what the scholarship letter said, that Avery Marshall started his company because someone believed in him. And now his foundation believes in me." She opened her portfolio, showed me her work, code she'd written, projects she was developing. It was like looking at Avery 25 years ago. That same fire, that same determination, that same belief that technology could make the world better. "Keep going," I told her. "Keep building. That's what Avery would want." After Sophie left, I walked through the foundation, past classrooms where students learned coding, engineering, business skills, past the mentorship room where professionals volunteered their time, past the library where Avery's books still lived. I ended up in the small office at the back, my office, where I managed the trust and made decisions about scholarships and programs. On the desk was a framed photo, Avery at 10 holding up a model rocket we'd built together in our old garage. His gap-toothed smile, his excited eyes. Next to it, a more recent photo, Avery at 35 standing in front of Marshall Innovations on opening day. Proud, accomplished, on the verge of the success he'd worked so hard to achieve. And next to that, a letter, the one Avery had left me, the one that had guided my choice. Do it from love, not from hurt, not from anger, not from the need to be right. Do it from the kind of love that heals instead of controls. I'd made the right choice. I knew that now. Not the easy choice, not the satisfying choice of justice and consequence, but the right choice. The choice that broke the cycle, that showed mercy, that built something good from pain. Taylor appeared in the doorway. "Riley, the board meeting is starting in 5 minutes. Are you ready? The foundation board." Taylor served on it now. So did Daniel. So did Sarah Kim from Marshall Innovations. So did Tom Bradley, Avery's college friend. People who'd known Avery, who understood both his brilliance and his flaws, who were committed to building something that honored his best self. "I'm ready," I said. We walked together to the conference room. Not friends exactly, not family in the traditional sense, but something. Some new kind of relationship built on honesty and forgiveness and shared purpose. The board meeting was productive. We approved 10 new scholarships, discussed expanding the program to include mental health counseling for students, reviewed financial statements showing the trust was growing. Avery's $73 million was doing exactly what he'd wanted it to do, creating opportunity, changing lives, building futures. After everyone left, I stayed behind, walked through the empty building, through classrooms and hallways and the library that held so many memories. I ended up in the leather chair, Avery's chair, our chair, pulled out Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, opened it to the page with Avery's note. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Below it, Avery's later edition, I built impediments, for Taylor, for myself. I see that now, but I don't know how to stop, how to let go, how to love without controlling. And below that in my handwriting the note I'd added 6 months ago, you learned, my son. At the end, you learned. And you left me the wisdom to finish what you started. The impediment became the way. The hurt became healing. That's your real legacy. I closed the book, set it gently on the side table. Outside, spring was arriving. The oak trees were budding. Birds were returning. The world was renewing itself the way it always did. And inside this building, this memorial to a complicated man who'd loved imperfectly but tried to do better, 20 students were learning that their futures weren't limited by their circumstances, that someone believed in them, that they deserved chances, that they could build something remarkable, just like Avery had, just like I'd believed he could 25 years ago when I'd written that check. The cycle of control had broken. The cycle of belief continued. That was the inheritance that mattered. Not the money, not the house, not the test or the punishment or the justice. The belief that people could change, could heal, could choose mercy over revenge and love over control. I stood up from the chair, turned off the lights, locked the door behind me. Tomorrow there would be more students, more classes, more lives changed by the foundation Avery had funded and I had shaped. But tonight I went home to my small apartment, the one I'd chosen, the one I could afford with the 25% of the estate I'd received, and I slept peacefully. No more motel rooms, no more exile, no more wondering if I'd been forgotten. I'd taken the test Avery had built, not the one he'd given Taylor, the one he'd given me. The test of choosing mercy over justice, love over control, healing over revenge. And I'd passed, not because I was strong or wise or good, but because Avery had taught me, even in death, even through his mistakes, that the only way forward was through forgiveness. That's the story I wanted to share. Not about revenge, not about justice. About the complicated love between a mother and son. About the cycles we perpetuate and the cycles we break. About choosing to heal instead of hurt.